welcome to The Art of Being Human. We're going to continue what we had started in terms of complicated grief reactions, and today I want to start off, and I mentioned it last time, but I didn't go into it because we were practically out of time, but the kinds of things that grief can cause. And I mentioned hallucinations, delusions, impairment of body function, suicidal thoughts, and depression. So what I really want to do is to define those, and then we'll move on to something else. What's the difference between a delusion and a hallucination? And what kind of hallucinations can you have, or what kinds of delusions can you have? Grief can cause them. A hallucination is when you see or hear something that's not there, that's not going on. If I were to hallucinate something, I would see something, and it wouldn't be exactly like a vision, but I would see something and it wasn't there. I had a student once during my first year of college teaching, and he was mentally disturbed. He had been diagnosed with a kind of schizophrenia, although I didn't know it at the time. But then he started making threats upon me. The first threat he made was that he gave me, this is very disconcerting at the time, he gave me a razor blade. He says, I want you to take care of and hold this razor blade in your hand. And I said, and of course I knew something was wrong with him when he started something like that. And I says, why would you want me to do that? He said, so you have something to attack me when I try to kill you. Can you imagine being a first-year teacher in a college and a student comes up with that? So, of course, I had to go to the dean, and we had a meeting, myself, the dean, and the student in question. And in the middle of the session that we had, the appointment we had with the dean, he said, I see butterflies crawling up the wall. All over the curtain are all of these butterflies, because they had a window in the office, and there were curtains in the window. And he was talking about what he saw. And, of course, it wasn't there. But he thought he saw them. He did see them. I should say that when a person sees something, they see something, even though in reality it may not be there. But according to the person, they're there because he's actually seeing them. And of course, at that point, we realized, and I knew it anyway, that the student was psychotic. And eventually, he was banned from the school. I had a guard. There's a guard around because he threatened to come and get me and take me and kill me. So I had to have protection. And the police department was around all the time. And it was really a scary experience. But the hallucination was the fact that he was seeing something. Now, you can have auditory hallucinations in which you hear something, and it's not there either. You're the only person that's hearing it. Now, it's not the same thing as if you are thinking of a song in your mind. Sometimes we have all kinds of songs that go through our minds, and we know that we're the only ones that are hearing them. It's a product of our own brain, a product of our own imaginations. That's not an auditory hallucination. That's just what we are creating. However, if a person thought that everybody could hear it, because they could hear it, so everybody could hear it. It was so loud and it was so present that certainly it was there, then you would wonder if they had an auditory hallucination. So those hallucinations are usually visual. Sometimes you can hear them, sometimes you can see them, sometimes you can do both, but that would be a hallucination. So what's a delusion? A delusion is believing something that's not true, believing something that's not happening, but you think it's true. Now, a lot of people have delusions, and they're not necessarily psychotic. Now, and not everything that you believe that's not true would fit into the category of being a delusion. If I think, for example, that I'm supposed to show up for a meeting on a Monday and the meeting turns out to be on a Tuesday, I have a false belief. I think the meeting's on Monday, but it's not. So that's just misinformation. That would not classify as a delusion. A delusion would be something so deeper, you know, like I believe that there are people in Mars that are watching us with telescopes. Now, that's a delusion. I once knew a lady, and she was a friend of mine, and she said that she hesitated to have me over because beings were taking pictures of us as we were talking together from behind the walls of her apartment. And I thought to myself, this is strange. So I questioned her about it. What are you talking about? Beings, what are you talking about? Well, they're everywhere, but a lot of them are on the 7th floor, and they're reaching down with their telescopes, and they're watching us, and they're taking pictures of us talking. Now, and she believed it. I mean, she really believed it. And I actually said, well, you know, how could a person get, you know, the walls are thin. You know, the walls aren't thick, and there are walls between each apartment. How would a person even fit in a wall to take a picture? Oh, they do it somehow. They're able to squeeze, and they are able to do it, and they have their camera equipment, and they take pictures. And she was so afraid of it that she didn't like to stay in her apartment alone because there were beings there watching her every moment, everything that she did. So she would take, if she was going to take a shower, she would put towels everywhere so they wouldn't be able to see her take a shower. And she absolutely believed it was true. Now, anybody with a reasonable thought pattern would never even think of it, but she believed it. And so for her, this is a delusion. And it may well have been hallucination, too, because she may well have seen these supposed beings that were taking pictures. And I just had to tell her, I don't see it. One thing that you have to do, you never can make fun of what they're seeing because they are actually seeing it. It is a creation of their own mind. It is a hallucination. But the fact is, they are actually seeing it. Nobody else is, but they are. So you have to treat it gently and say, well, you know, I understand that you see it. I don't see it. And I bet if we had 10 people in here, they wouldn't see it either. You don't want to offend them, but you need to gradually tell them that what they're seeing and what they're hearing is not reality. Or they could be hearing something that's not reality. Well, the people sometimes who murder other people, and they say, well, this being told me I had to do it. And they're listening to this voice, which is not a normal voice at all, but it's telling them, you have to hurt somebody, you have to kill somebody. That would be an auditory hallucination. But it's also can fit into a delusion because they're believing something that they think they're hearing, that they are hearing, not that they think they're hearing, but that they are hearing. But it's not reasonable and it's not real. Now, a lot of people have what they call a brief reactive psychosis. For a brief period of time, we may be just talking minutes, when they believe something or hear something and it's not true and it just fades away. And they can have those episodes once in a while. But at the same time, some of them can be longer and they can last longer. And these are the kinds of things that people really need to be treated for. Now, delusions then are things that you believe that are not true. Hallucinations are things that you either see or hear or both see and hear, and they're not true, but they seem true to the person who's experiencing them. Now, impairment of body function is when you can't function normally. You can't get up in your day and you have your breakfast and you do the dishes and you clean your house or you do whatever you have to do. You sit down, you watch some television, you go out, you do some shopping. Normal things. Normal things are very, very hard for a person who has this kind of an impairment to do. They can't just get themselves together to do things that are normal that we do without even thinking. We do it every day. And we don't even think about it. It's a part of our day. Well, they can't do that. They have an impairment. They can't think quite straight. They can't concentrate quite straight. How do I do this? Where are my keys? How do I unlock the door? How do I make this cake? It doesn't make any sense to me. I can't just do those things. Body impairment is not unusual when you have an intense grief reaction. Things just don't work quite right. You can't really put things together quite right. So that's the impairment of body function. And then you can get suicidal thoughts, and this becomes dangerous. You have to be able to discern, if you're a person who's working with a loved one, how serious are those suicidal thoughts? Because some people do kill themselves because they can't live without the other. Now, you can easily put a stop to it. You talk to them about it. You say, are you planning to really hurt yourself? And you have to be forthright about it. You can't skirt around the issues. Most people, if they're feeling suicidal, feel relieved if other people know about it and will take action. They feel relieved about it because it's a heaviness that they are dealing with, and they feel like they're dealing with it alone. I feel like this. I feel I want to do it. I know it's not right. How can I help myself? But if somebody comes in and asks them, are you thinking about these things? They're relieved to be able to say yes. In their heart and soul, they're thinking, thank God somebody knows. You know, thank God somebody will take actions. And then you don't leave a person alone like that. You can't leave a person alone like that. Now, most of the time, these thoughts are fleeting. I can't live without him. Maybe I'd be better gone. Doesn't mean that they're going to run out and do it, but you have to take it seriously because at some point, maybe somebody would. I had a person come to me. She was a student. Every Friday to tell me she was going to commit suicide on the weekend. On Monday, I saw her. She hadn't made any suicidal attempts that I know of on the weekend. For her, it was an attention-getting mechanism. She wanted my attention, so she would tell me on Friday I wouldn't see her. Well, then I'm obligated to take action. Legally, I'm obligated to take action. And finally, I said, you know, this has been going on long enough. And I was a little bit confrontive with her, not mean, not nasty, but I was a little bit confrontive with her. And I finally said, you know, I can't take responsibility if you do something over the weekend. It's not going to be my fault, and I'm not going to take responsibility for it, because you have to make the decision whether you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. And I don't want you to do it. But whatever you do, whether you do or whether you don't, it's your responsibility, it's your choice, it's not mine. So I am free from feeling guilty if you should do something. Now, of course, I didn't say it in exactly those words, and I was very careful what I said. And normally, you wouldn't confront a person like that unless you really were sure that it was an attention-getting mechanism, which I was in this case, having studied suicidology, having dealt with people who were suicidal. I was like 99% sure that it was an attention-getting device. But when you have a person, and she did not attempt to commit, and that was the end of her thread. She just went about her life normally, and I went about my life normally, so it had a good outcome. But when you're dealing with a person who is in an intense grief state, their minds aren't normal. They're not thinking normal. Their thinking is twisted, and it's all based around the fact that they've lost somebody that they don't think they can live without. That person is so important to them that they can't live without them. At least they have the feeling that they can't live without them. And so they're apt to think occasionally about suicide. And if they mention suicide at all, you have to take that seriously. You have to have somebody with them. You have to talk to them about it. You have to see that there are lots of things in life that they can live for that are good, and that even though they're suffering from this loss, there's recovery from the loss, and they can go on with their life. And so you kind of shepherd them through it, but you don't leave them alone. And you take it seriously because it might be serious. A lot of people say, I can't live without so-and-so, and so therefore, if they go, I'm going to go too. But they're not serious in terms of the fact that they're going to actually do it. But you don't know whether they're serious or not, and they may be serious, so you have to take any such statement very seriously and deal with it like it's a real threat, because it may be a real threat. And so you work with them, you send them for help. If necessary, you bring them to the emergency room of a hospital. They will always have somebody on call that they can call in to work with this individual, to arrange for help with this individual. Most counseling centers have people that are on call throughout the day and night, and also on weekends and holidays. So if you run into a situation, there will be somebody on call. I used to be a part of a suicide team, and I would take my days, certain days that I would be on call, and I would have my phone with me, or I would stay home all the time, just in case I got that call that was an emergency, and then I could get right into it. So if you're on call, or if you know of a suicide hotline, somebody would be on call, unless they publish the fact that they're only open certain hours of the day, which would be unusual for a suicide hotline. Most suicides occur at night, so there would be somebody on call. So even if they're talking about suicide, you have to gear them, you have to deal with it like it's a very, very important issue, like it's very serious, like they're taking this seriously. Otherwise, why would they mention it? People who are not serious about suicide will mention it and say, oh, I think I'll kill myself if this happens. But they're not serious. But you don't know that, especially for a person that's in grief. And you can't take something like that lightly. You have to deal with it. So depression. A lot of grief can lead into a very serious depression. If the grief is complicated, and if the fact is they're not handling it well, they're not moving through it, they may end up with a clinical depression. Now, a clinical depression is different than a normal depression or a normal, occasionally blue day. We all have those days, but depression is clinical. It's long-lasting, it's deeper, it's intense. They can't walk away from it, and they get stuck in the depression, and they don't know how to move out of it, or they can't move out of it. This requires professional help. It can be healed. It is healed, and a lot of people do have this kind of depression. They do get out of it, and their lives go on, and they're all right. But just be aware of the fact that anyone who is in a deep depression from a death, that grief can cause that deep depression, and it can be more than just a normal depression. It can be really a serious depression. Most people who have a depression, a deep depression, they'll have one episode of it, and they'll get over it in about 10 months. Now, that seems like a long time to be depressed, and it is, but that's how long it can last. 40% of people who are depressed will have recurring episodes. They'll get out of it. At some point, they'll get back into it. They'll get out of it. Another point, they'll get back into it. It kind of comes and goes, and a lot of times it comes and goes depending upon what the situation is with them personally, what's going on in their lives that would cause them to be depressed, and what's going on in their lives that will help them to get out of it. They may be cyclic. If they're cyclic, they're going to go into a depression every so often, and it's in their genes to be that way. I really think that a lot of the mental illnesses, including clinical depression, can be born out of the fact that they have the gene structure for it, because some people just go through it, and then they come out of it, and then they go through it again, and then they come out of it. One thing to do is when they're out of it and they're feeling good, they should write down what makes them feel good, how do they feel, and then also help them to realize that when they're in the worst part of it, they will get better because they always do. Part of the problem with a clinical depression is when a person is in it, they feel that they're never going to get out of it, but the body was never geared to keep the same emotion months and months and months at a time. Generally speaking, you're at a certain point and then you level off, because we're all cyclic to a certain degree. We all have our ups and downs to a certain degree, and that's perfectly normal. But a person who goes deep into a depression, they have to realize, if they don't have it all the time, they have to realize that they will get better. And this is one of their symptoms. One of the symptoms symptoms of clinical depression is the fear that you're never going to get out of it. One of the symptoms of a deep-seated anxiety is that you fear that you'll never get out of it. And then when the body starts to lift and you do get out of it, you wonder what made you so depressed. Well, I don't know why I felt like that, but I did. So what I used to have people do when I was counseling them is write how they felt when they're feeling good. And then when they get into part of their cycle that's deeply depressed, they can read every day, every hour if need be, the things that they know are going to happen. Like they'll lift out of it, they'll feel good again, and this is how I feel when I'm feeling good. And I make that an important part of the therapy. Now, of course, anyone who's that depressed needs to have some kind of clinical help. They need to have a psychologist. They need to have a psychiatrist. They may need to be taking medication, because there's no reason to go through that if you can reach a level where you're stable most of the time. And I'm a great believer in faith, for one thing, and also in getting the medication and the treatment that you need so you don't have to go down to that depth and you don't have to stay there. Don't try to do it alone. It's very difficult to do alone. Usually you try to analyze what made you depressed and you dig your hole deeper and you fall deeper in the hole. If you're feeling badly, just say, okay, this is a day that I'm feeling badly, but it's going to get better. And don't try to overanalyze your situation, because if you do, you're only going to make it worse. Accept the fact of how you feel. Get the help that you need, and I really mean that seriously. Get the help that you need, and let the therapist help you deal with it, and take the medication if it's prescribed, because that can really be a help too. It's kind of a shot in the dark in terms of meds, because some people react to meds good and some people not so good, and you have to get a medication that seems to suit your body chemistry. That may take a little doing and experimenting to find the right one, but the right one is out there. All it has to do is be found. You have all kinds of hope to be better. Even if you're grief-stricken and your depression is caused by grief, you have all kinds of reasons to know that you can feel better. And so I'm going to close it here because we're about out of time. We'll continue with this next time. Please join me then. And we'll have these numbers on the screen for you. The Veterans Crisis Hotline and the Suicide Hotline are the same number, and the Domestic Violence Hotline for the state of New Hampshire.